For my final October 2021 review, I'm going to look at a game that, once again, I've been wanting to play for the longest time. At least probably 4 or 5 years. Why haven't I touched it? Who knows? But that game is Porky Pig's Haunted Holiday, a game I first took notice of in an old issue of Disney Adventures. Does anybody remember those? I wish I still had mine. I had a ton of them. Porky Pig's Haunted Holiday is a simple enough game to figure out. It's your standard platformer, but with a bit of a twist. See, Porky is simply trying to go to sleep before his vacation, but he keeps getting these nightmares. That's all the story you get, at least according to the manual. You just need to guide Porky through all the stages so that he can get some peaceful sleep before departing. Right from the start, something seems off. The menu music is just strange. Sadly, it never really improves. The music, something that should have been used to draw the player into the game and get your head bobbing, is, in plain English, absolute crap. It's unusual for me to talk about the music of the game right at the start of my reviews, but it was the first thing I noticed. It never gets any better either. The songs are typically short and loop frequently, lending to that feeling that someone was experimenting with the game instead of on their keyboard at home. Let's move on to the actual gameplay before I go off on a tirade. Obviously, you play as Porky. He can jump, which is the primary method of defeating your foes. You can find fruit baskets that allow you to throw fruit at enemies, but these seem to be somewhat rare, and it's actually easier just to leap on the enemies anyway, as the windup for throwing the projectiles makes it that it takes far too long to be useful. Of course, there are some issues with even jumping on your enemies. Porky as a whole controls kind of slippery, like he's always walking on ice. I've had plenty of issues where I was jumping around and kept missing the enemies, or other times where I took damage because, let's face it, Porky's hitbox is fairly large compared to some of the enemies. Even with this though, I will say that it feels like the game is very generous and lenient with taking out your enemies. There were times where I felt like I would be the one getting hurt, yet the creature died instead. As for the stages themselves, you start in a haunted forest. Very cliche. The game does a good job at fitting the mood though. The enemies are just flat out strange and complete the silly dreamlike atmosphere. The forest is dark and brooding, and the music, although horrible, still sounds like something that would fit, being all eerie. One thing you may notice though is that the game has randomized weather. You might start the forest in the darkness, but if you have to continue like I did, it may be dusk. I really like this effect, and it's a shame more games didn't do this kind of thing. Speaking of the graphics, they're actually phenomenal, and sadly it feels like this is what the developers spent most of their time on. Porky has some great animation, although his walking motions look kinda silly, like he's tiptoeing through in the stages. The enemies, although fairly small, have some great detail to them. The levels are equally as visually pleasant, with lots of care given to backgrounds to make them feel cartoonish and dreamlike. The levels also have a bit of openness to them. Though not quite to the extent as, say, Metroid, you can explore the stages in order to get extra points, health, lives, and so on. For example, you can keep going to the right on the first stage to end the level, or you can backtrack and climb up into the trees, getting all sorts of goodies. It also helps lend to the labyrinthian nature of the Atlantis stage, which I couldn't even complete due to the annoying bubble puzzle. You have to activate 2 different bubbles, and then have to leap between them, avoiding spikes and just flat out falling down, forcing you to repeat the puzzle. I got through the first set after a lot of frustration, but the second one was even worse. I just couldn't complete it and quit out of annoyance and feeling the rage to throw the controller across the room. Well, as far across the room as the cable would allow. Until here, the game was fairly easy to complete, due to the generous hitboxes and your life meter. Continues also seem to be unlimited, so that's a plus. And that's Porky Pig's Haunted Holiday in a nutshell. It's not a bad game, but it seems like presentation was favored over gameplay. I can't say I didn't enjoy it, but I could do without those stupid bubble puzzles, because I kept falling off. The weather effects are pretty neat, as is the animation, but the music sucked. Overall, if you have an SNES or a way to play SNES games, it's not a horrible game to add to your collection, especially since it goes for bargain bin pricing. Final score? 4 out of 7. This is Reaper. Happy fragging.